Hello, I'm Peter Bogdanovich. I write books about movies and I direct movies, and my mission is to try to preserve America's film heritage through my writing. Your Toledo Lucas County Public Library has a similar mission to preserve our heritage for generations to come. So visit your source, the Toledo Lucas County Public Library. This book that we talk about, that's just sitting over there, Who the Devil Made It, it's a very large book, as you can see. It's over 850 pages. The bulk of it is interviews with 16 directors, some of whom were just mentioned. So it isn't all me talking, it's mostly the directors talking. The reason I called it Who the Devil Made It is because it's based on a remark of Howard Hawks's, who was one of my favorite directors. I'll tell you a bit about him tonight. I asked Mr. Hawks, I said, well, which directors over the years have you liked the best? And he said, well, I liked almost anybody that made you realize who the devil was making the picture. Because the director is the storyteller, and he ought to have his own way of telling it. Well, that seemed to me to be about as good a summation of the personal signature idea of movies, which is not often discussed, I mean, particularly lately. Probably because we don't have very many personalities left making pictures. But the whole idea of what the French used to call the politique des auteurs, which was what they wrote about in the 50s, was that despite the fact that American directors often worked under the control of a studio and often directed scripts that they did not necessarily write, nevertheless, the French said, looking at our pictures, these various directors were in fact auteurs, authors, because they put their personality into the work in such a way that you could feel their presence and their personal involvement from behind the screen. Now, I'm not going to bore you with going into details about how all this happened to affect American movies. It did in the 60s and influenced criticism in America for many years. But I want to make it vivid to you, so I'm going to talk to you first about probably the most famous director in the history of movies, Alfred Joseph Hitchcock, whom I had the privilege of knowing for about 25 years. And this a little story will kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about. I was in New York. It was before I'd moved to California. Been there a few times. I knew Hitchcock about 3 years. It was about 1963 or 64. Hitchcock came to New York to open The Birds, his latest film, and invited me up for a drink at his hotel at the St. Regis, and he went up there. And now I don't drink really today, but in those days I really had never hardly touched any alcohol. This was a few years ago. And but that's not the case with Hitch. And he had ordered up a whole bunch of frozen daiquiris for himself and his wife, and my wife at the time was with me too. And so he, of course, knocked them back pretty quick and got rather red-faced quickly. And I was working on the same one, you know. And he says, "You're not drinking your drink." So I said, well, I drank a little bit more, but after about 5 minutes, "You're not drinking your drink." So that went on. So I knocked back one, and I'd really started to feel a definite buzz, and everything was kind of nice and floating a little bit. And anyway, it got a little later, and we're talking Hitchcock, very nice, talk. We go out, he has to go to dinner, so now we go into the corridor and wait for the elevator, and you know how it is when you're waiting for the elevator, not much to talk about. The door's open, we walk into the elevator, and we're not talking, the four of us, so again, just kind of that going down in an elevator feeling. And the doors open on the 18th floor, and a couple come in, three people actually, come in dressed for dinner. And now, without any warning, Hitch turns to me and he says, "You know, it was quite horrible. I mean, the man was lying on the ground with blood coming out of his ear and out of his mouth. It was quite shocking." So now, having had a couple of drinks, as I said, I really thought I'd lost my mind and that I had missed an entire, series of remarks. Of course, the people were riveted, and the doors opened on the 15th floor. This went right on. He said, I said, there was blood everywhere. There was blood on the floor, blood on the wall, blood coming out of his ear. It was quite shocking. And of course, this was at the time when Hitchcock had been on television as the host of his series for about 9 years. So he was a very famous figure. I mean, as recognizable as, Clint Eastwood or Barbra Streisand. And so everybody in the elevator knew exactly who it was. Nobody said a word. And about the 10th floor, some more people come in. Hitch goes on. I looked at this poor man. I said, "My God, good God, man, what's happened to you?" And do you know what he said to me? And just as he says this, the doors to the lobby opened, and everybody in the elevator kind of, nobody wanted to leave the elevator, but they had to. So go out, and they kind of clustered at the elevator, and Hitch just walked right by them. And so now, halfway across the lobby, I still in a kind of daze, I said, so what did he say, Hitch? He said, "What? Oh, nothing. That's just my elevator story." Okay, now, the reason that's so funny and entertaining to you all is because you know the kind of movies Alfred Hitchcock made. He made suspense pictures. He made pictures about murder, crime, funny pictures often, witty anyway. And so I don't have to spend an hour trying to explain to you what Alfred Hitchcock was like so that story would make work for you. You know, because you know his work. Well, that's the same thing with a lot of these other directors, only they're not so easy to explain, because the reason with Hitchcock it's fairly easy is because he made pretty much throughout his career the same kind of genre film. I mean, he worked in the crime area predominantly, not exclusively, but predominantly. So, of course, it becomes easy to say, oh, the Hitchcock, master of suspense, and so on. However, what I want to make is that some of the other directors, like John Ford, who isn't in my book, but he's talked about quite a bit, but I did a separate book about him, which actually is back in print, I'm happy to say, or Orson Welles, who's also not in the book, but I think my interview book with him is over there, so, or Howard Hawks, or George Cukor, or Fritz Lang, or Otto Preminger. All of these men had very strong personalities, and the difference was that many of them made different kinds of films. For example, Howard Hawks, who's one of my favorites, he worked in just about every genre you can imagine. He made musicals, he made Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, he made detective pictures, he made The Big Sleep, he made, he did westerns, Red River, which you'll see later a little bit of. He worked in every single genre there is, comedies like Bringing Up Baby or His Girl Friday. So it's very much more difficult to say, well, that's kind of what Howard Hawks is like. It would take me a good deal longer to kind of convey it to you, although I will try. But what has excited me, what I got very interested in about pictures, was this sort of invisible personality that makes itself tangible and accessible during the movie. And the more I got to know about a number of these directors, the more I enjoyed their work, which is sort of the point of any kind of art, to get the most you can out of it. Hitchcock, to go back to him, had very specific, theories about suspense and about his craft, and he loved to talk about it. Nothing more exciting to Hitch than to describe to you how he was going to do something. He had a theory that a thing called the MacGuffin, a theory about the MacGuffin. I said, what is the MacGuffin? He says, the MacGuffin is that thing in a picture that all the characters are interested in, but the audience doesn't care about. And one of the things you find in making pictures that the producers will say, well, we have to concentrate on this, and because the characters are interested in it. And Hitchcock had the point that the characters may be interested in it, but the audience may very well not be. And that was kind of a major point that he made. And I said, well, why do you call it a MacGuffin? Where does that come from? He said, oh, that comes from an old story, an old joke. Two Irishmen or two Scotsmen are riding on a train. One turns to the other and says, what's that box over your head? Oh, that's, the other one says, that's an instrument. That's a MacGuffin. And the other one says, oh, really, what's a MacGuffin? He says, oh, a MacGuffin is an instrument for capturing wild tigers in the Highlands of Scotland. And the other fellow says, but there are no tigers in the Highlands of Scotland. Oh, the other fellow says, well, then that's no MacGuffin. Meaning it doesn't matter. I'm going to show you in a few moments a clip from a Hitchcock picture, and with Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman, called Notorious. And in there you will see an example of the MacGuffin. And also the other thing that Hitchcock talked about a lot, which was the difference and the superiority of suspense over shock or surprise. I asked him to define this theory for me one time, and he said, well, he says, you have two men walk into a room, and they're having a very boring conversation. They sit down at a table, and they continue to have this conversation about the weather and sports and automobiles, very boring conversation. Suddenly there's an explosion. A bomb has gone off. The audience is shocked for 30 seconds. Now, take the same scene over again. Two men come in, same thing, sit down at the table, exactly the same conversation. Only now, while they're talking, you cut to a shot under the table and you see that a bomb has been placed there. Now, the very boredom of the conversation becomes exciting. The audience saying, for God's sake, shut up. Stop talking. There's a bomb ticking, don't you see? Now you've got your audience working for 3 and 4 minutes as opposed to being shocked for 20 seconds. That is the difference between suspense and surprise. Well, it may sound so simple as to be, not even worth discussing, but believe it or not, it is like, I would say that what I just talked about, what Hitchcock was talking about, is the central problem in constructing films, which is that people constantly today particularly say, let's surprise the audience. And one is constantly saying, let's not surprise them, let's give them information, because then they actually working longer. So this is a big thing, not just in drama, and it isn't just in suspense or crime pictures, it's just in telling a story. It's often good for the audience to be, so to speak, ahead of the characters. Of course, it's essential in comedy. You can get big laughs, big surprise laughs, particularly if you're gross or vulgar, which pictures like Something About Mary will prove. But that's as easy as getting a shock by showing a shot of a bunch of snakes. So most audiences are going to go, ah! but that's not art, that's just that. So, but it's very true with comedy. Just think of Laurel and Hardy walking down the street. You cut to a banana peel. You cut back to them walking down the street, you start laughing immediately because you know somebody's going to laugh. Somebody's going to fall, and that's going to amuse you. So again, it's giving an audience information that the characters don't have. Comedy and suspense both have that in common. So now I'm going to show you a scene, if you're ready to show it, from Notorious, and in there you will see exemplified what we just talked about, the MacGuffin and the suspense element, which he does with champagne bottles. So anyway, will you run that? And it's a few minutes. I think you'll enjoy it. Ingrid Bergman is married to Claude Rains. It's a party, and Cary Grant is a government official. He has the key to the wine cellar where they're looking for what is in fact the MacGuffin, some strange bottles of wine.
I'll keep the garden room and I'll take it.
There's a party going on upstairs.
Someone's coming. Alex, he's seen us. No, he only think we... No.
You'd better stay upstairs, Joseph. They may need you.
Yes.
Push me away. I'm sorry to intrude on this tender scene.
I couldn't help what happened. He's been drinking.
So he carried you down here.
Oh, please, Alex.
You love him.
No, of course not. Please go.
For what it's worth, as an apology, your wife is telling the truth. I knew her before you, loved her before you, but I wasn't as lucky as you. Sorry, Lucian.
Please go.
Good night.
Okay. I know you'd probably like to see the rest of the picture. Sorry, I know, it's the trouble with Hitchcock. He's very engrossing. Well, there you have the bottles of champagne is the bomb, because the less champagne there is, the more you know they're going to have to come down there. That's a running thing. And the MacGuffin is whatever that was that fell out of that bottle. Now, none of us really care what it was, but you see the characters care a lot. In fact, David Selznick, the producer, who brought Hitchcock over to America, in fact, what happened to my lights? They can't see me now. I mean, they can't see the play of nuance on my face. Oh well. Just think of it as a silent picture. It got darker. That's what they're trying to tell me something. Anyway, Cary Grant, I asked him about this picture, and he said, "Oh yeah, that's the one hitched through. That's the one hitched through at Ingrid." He always did that. He gave the picture to the girl if he could. He also told me a wonderful story. When they were doing the piece, I said, "How was Hitchcock, to work with as a director? What is he like on the set?" He said, He says, "One day we were shooting. We were shooting this scene, and Ingrid was there. She came in, and she just wasn't there. You could look in somebody's eyes, and you feel that, but they're just not there. And she was playing the scene, and it went on, but she wasn't with us." Hitch didn't say anything, just sat in his chair, didn't say a thing. And finally, after a while, about half an hour, we'd been doing this for maybe 2-3 hours, and Hitch didn't say anything, just said, "Go on, do it again," whatever it was. Finally, I saw in Ingrid's eyes that she was there. She was getting into the scene. It was finally happening. I could see the light in her eyes, and just as it was happening, Hitch said, "Cut." And I thought, why is he cutting now? And Hitch just sat there, and he looked at her very quietly, and he said, "Good morning, Ingrid." One of the things that people don't realize about making pictures, I guess, I certainly didn't after I made a couple. I was talking to John Ford about some scene in the picture, and he said, "Oh, I was just an accident. Most of the good things in pictures happen by accident." Wow, I thought to myself, that exploded, and I thought, really? So I went to, I knew Orson Welles at the time also, and I said to Orson, Ford, Welles was a big fan of John Ford, thought he was best director, American director. And I said, that Ford said that the best things in pictures happen by accident. What would you do? Do you think that's true, Orson? And Orson looked at me and says, "Oh, thank you." Orson said, "Yes. You could even say that a director is a man who presides over accidents." Well, I didn't understand that for quite a while, but I do now. What it means is that you must leave yourself open when you're making a picture, and a picture really is made to a large extent, I think the good ones anyway, while you're shooting the picture. I know, well, my cup runneth over. Just wait till we get to the next clip. Anyway, it's fascinating. It's like a rock show. Anyway, one of the things you have to do when you're making a picture is kind of leave things open enough that those happy accidents that happen either to the actor, or something happens to the actor, or something just happens. I mean, I remember watching John Ford shoot, and the dog ran into the shot. We were out in Monument Valley, and the dog ran into the shot, and I thought, that's interesting. And I heard somebody say, don't chase that dog out of the shot. Ford will fire you, because if the dog runs in, he thinks that's great. anything that's accidental. And in making pictures, I found that is really a big aspect of it. Now, I'm going to show you, I think this is the next thing. I'm going to show you a clip to illustrate this from Red River, a picture Howard Hawks directed. Now, let me just tell you about Howard Hawks. He was, I've done a little impression of him, which could or could not be good, you don't know, because nobody knows how he talked, but honest, it did sound like him. He was very cool, very calm, you know. And I once said to him, I said, you know, talking about John Wayne and what a big star he was. And Red River was the picture that really made John Wayne a superstar. He'd been a likable leading man, but until Red River in 1948, where he played an older man, that was the picture that made him a superstar, and Howard Hawks directed it. But John Ford had discovered, so to speak, John Wayne and made a Stagecoach with him, which made Wayne a huge star. And as the years went by, the names of Ford and Wayne were forever linked in people's minds. So now Howard would tell me, Red River was Howard's first Western. Howard would tell me that people would often come up to Ford and say, Mr. Ford, we really like Red River. And Ford would say, thank you very much. And that made Hawks laugh. He thought that was funny. So I was talking to him about Wayne one time, and Howard said, well, you know, all these years I always felt that everything that had happened to Duke was just a little bit over his head. I said, really? Yeah. The whole thing? Yeah. I don't think he quite knew what hit him. And I must say, from knowing Wayne a little bit, it was the impression I had too, that he was a little out of breath, a little bit like, you know, some things. He was way behind in catching up on his life. You know, like the rabbit in Alice in Wonderland. I'm late. You know, Duke always seemed late. Of course, the greatest line I ever heard about the meanest line was John Ford. I was talking to Ford one time about. I was sitting in his room with him. He was in bed watching television. I was trying to make conversation with him, which was not easy. You know, Ford was very rough, gruff, and often tough to deal with. And one of his tricks was that if he thought you were being stupid, he would play. He was hard of hearing, but if he thought you were being stupid, he'd go all the way and pretend to be deaf. And so I was, you know, 16 or 9. I mean, I felt like 16. I was about 26. My voice was sort of like Henry Aldrich, you know, Mr. Ford. And for those of you who remember Henry Aldrich, and so I said to him, you know, it's Duke's birthday next week, and I thought I'd give him a present. I thought I'd give him a book. Huh? It's Duke's birthday next week. I thought I'd give him a book. Huh? Well, this went on for about till I was screaming. It's Duke's birthday next week. I thought I'd give him a book. He's got a book. Anyway, so here we are with the Red River, in which Wayne is particularly good, really wonderful. And there's a scene in it which you're about to see, just a short scene. There's been a stampede, and one of the guys got killed in the stampede, and they bury him. And while they're burying him, you'll see the shadow of a cloud goes over the funeral, and then Duke walks over and he gets a whip and he's going to beat the guy that caused the stampede. Now, I said to Hawks, I mentioned this scene, and I said, now, did you plan on that cloud? He said, well, we saw it coming. And we said, let's go ahead and give it a shot. Let's try it, try to get it. He said, once in a while you get lucky, you get one of those Ford shots. Because Ford was famous for great weather scenes. And I said, well, did you think of it as a Ford shot when you made it? Oh, yeah, sure. Hard not to think of Jack Ford when you're making a Western. Hard not to think of him when you're making any picture. But it was basically an accident that he took advantage of. So let's run this little clip from Red River, and then I'm going to show you what an effect that had on me. And now, hopefully these lights will now go.
Nothing into this world, but certainly carry nothing else. The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Amen. And you killed Dan Latimer.
Sure, I did. I know that too. I know it, and I still... I give my right
Stealing
arm.
sugar like a kid. Well, they whip kids to teach them better.
They what?
All right, old Teeler, climb to that wagon wheel.
No, they won't. Nobody's gonna tie me to no wagon wheel, no sir.
And you'll take it without a wheel to lead it, yes.
Oh, Mr. Johnson, I was wrong, awful wrong, but nobody's gonna whip me.
Turn around, Bug.
Don't do it, Mr. Johnson.
Turn around, you'll get it in the eye.
Do it, Mr. Johnson, I tell you, don't do it.
You just shot him right between the eyes. Just as sure as you're standing there.
Okay, thank you.
Well, you shot him.
Just as sure as you're standing there. You saw the cloud go by? Well, that's the kind of thing Ford did in a picture called She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. And as Ford told it, they were out in the middle of Monument Valley, and as Ford said, a terrific thunderstorm came up. I mean, you know, all the tourists bolted for the cars. And I said, let's shoot it. And we had a very pedantic cameraman, and he put on the slate, shot under protest. And he won the Academy Award for Best Photographer. So that was an example. It's a famous scene, I can't show it to you today, but in which you see the cavalry riding, thunder and lightning, and it was all a real thunderstorm, which he said, let's shoot. Well, that's the kind of accidental thing on an obvious level that Ford was famous for. And he always, things, as Henry Fonda said, things always happened for Ford, which is why he seemed to have the luck of the Irish. Now, I was shooting a picture some years back, which I'll show you a clip of in a moment, which connects to this. We were shooting in Texas with Ben Johnson, an old alumni of Mr. Ford's. And it had taken me a long time. This is a picture called The Last Picture Show. It had taken me a long time to get Ben Johnson to do the picture. He had turned me down about 3 times. Now, it went like this. I couldn't figure out who to play this old character, this wonderful part. He dies halfway through the picture, but it was like a very important role. And some of you may know Ben eventually won the Academy Award for this, but I couldn't figure out who to cast, and we were thinking of a lot of people, couldn't figure out who to cast. Finally, I was leafing through some book, and there was Ben Johnson, and I said, Ben Johnson, of course, has to be Ben Johnson. Why didn't I think of it before? Again, an accident, just happened to be looking through this player's book. So I found him, called him, sent him the script, and he turned me down. I said, Why? Oh, it's too many words, Pete. Too many words. So I called Mr. Ford and I said, you know, I've got a really good part for Ben Johnson, and he says he won't do it. He says there's too many words. Oh, Jesus, I mean, he always says that. I mean, when we were doing Yellow Ribbon, I mean, he'd come on the set and he'd say to the script girl, are there any words for me? And if she said yes, he'd go over and sulk. I mean, and if she said no, you just have to ride, he'd be happy. So, where is old Ben? I said, well, he's in Arizona. Let me his number, I'll call him. I'll call him. So I gave him the number, and about 15 minutes go by, the phone rings, it's Mr. Ford. He'll do it. Oh, did you talk to him? He'll do it. I said, Jesus, I mean, what's the matter with you, Ben? I mean, Peter's got a good part for you. He says it's a good part. I mean, what do you want to be, Duke's sidekick your whole life? I mean, what's the matter with you? He'll do it. Okay, I hang up the phone. Now, it's about 5 minutes later, the phone rings. It's Ben from Arizona. Hello, Ben? You put the old man on me. I said, well, I really think you should play this part. Oh, Pete, I wish you hadn't have done that. Damn it. Well, I'll come and see you. He hadn't agreed to it. So he comes to my office about 2 weeks later, and he's sitting there, and he's got the script in his hand, I remember, and he says, you know, this picture's got a lot of dirty words in it. And I might want my mother to see this, and I don't see how I can do this. And I said, well, Ben, I mean, you know, you don't have more than one or two words. I mean, nothing really. He said, oh, Pete, and he wouldn't do it. Finally, I says to him, Ben, you got to do this thing. If you do this picture, you're going to win the Academy Award. He really got angry. He says, God damn, why do you say that? And I said, I don't know. I just think you in that part is. Well, it went on for another hour or so. Finally, he slammed the script shut and said, all right, I'll do the goddamn thing. And that's how and he did win the Oscar. Anyway, so we're down in Texas, and we had this one big scene by what's called a tank dam. For those of you who aren't from Texas, maybe you think it's a lake, but they call it a tank dam. There's a scene there. It was pretty much his most important scene, Ben Johnson's, a long speech he had to do. And we rehearsed it once or twice, and I had decided I wanted to do the bulk of it, not all the scene, but the bulk of the scene, the big part of his speech, to do that without a cut. In other words, the camera would be here, we had some tracks laid out, he was sitting there, and the camera would, move in on him, and then move in even further, and then it would pull back, and then pull back further. That was the plan. There'd be no cut in between except one or two. But we were going to shoot it without a cut. In other words, even if I might cut a couple of times, the basic thing was going to be shot without any interruption. Once I said action, until he finished the speech, which was a 2-page scene, 3-page scene, there would be no interruption, that was it. And there would be no coverage. What coverage means, shooting it from other angles. That wasn't the plan. The plan was just to shoot this in one piece, and that would be it. So we started to shoot, and it was a cloudy day, and suddenly, almost as though if somebody said to me, where would you like the sun to come out? Because if you'd like it to come out, where would you like it? I would have said there, and that's where it came out. And it came out, and it was kind of very effective. And then it went back in again and came out again. And I looked over at the cameraman. It was a big area. The cameraman was way over there. And I just went, and he went. My question was, will the exposure handle both the sunlight and the shadow? And his answer was, I don't know. So, of course, we let it roll. And it was just amazing. But toward the end of the scene, when this kid, Tim Bottoms, had one line, count it, one, he forgot it. And so here we are shooting, and this thing is beautiful. You have no idea. Well, I'm going to show it to you in a minute. The sun and this, and then the kid forgot his line. So I said the line to him after I realized he'd forgotten it. And then he said it, but there was a pause. And as I said, I didn't want to cut. So anyway, we got it. When it was over, I said, what happened? He said, I didn't forget my line. I said, what happened then? He said, well, I was thinking. Yeah, right. I was thinking about strangling him, but so we had to do it again. So we did it again, and of course he remembered his line this time, and everything was. But the only thing was the sun stayed hidden. And so when we saw the 2 takes, and then by the way, right after that, it started to rain like crazy, and we had to get out of there, and one of the trucks got stuck for a week. Anyway, now I'm going to show you the scene. This was what we saw pretty much, and the other one had no sun. And it was a well-acted scene, but it didn't have the accident of nature that made all the difference. So here's the scene from the last picture show.
I thought you boys wanted to fish. Come on, keep an eye on them corks, Billy.
I don't think there's anything in this tank except turtles.
That's what I like about it, tell you the truth. Want to try one?
Sure.
I never liked to clean fish or eat them either. Spend half your time picking out bones. Yeah, just come out here and get a little scenery. 2 pretty days spend in town. You wouldn't believe how this country's changed. First time I seen it, there wasn't a mesquite tree on it. Or a prickly pear neither. I used to own this land, you know. First time I watered a horse at this tank was more than 40 years ago. I reckon the reason why I always drag you out here is probably I'm just as sentimental as the next fella when it comes to old times. Old times. I brought a young lady swimming out here once, more than 20 years ago. It was after my wife had lost her mind and my boy was dead. Me and this young lady was pretty wild, I guess, and pretty deep. We used to come out here horseback and go swimming without no bathing suits. One day she wanted to swim the horses across this tank. Kind of a crazy thing to do, but we'd done it anyway. She bet me a silver dollar she could beat me across. She did. So the horse I was riding didn't want to take the water. But she was always looking for something to do like that. Something wild. I bet she's still got that silver dollar.
Whatever happened to her?
Oh, she grew up. She was just a girl then, really. Here, let me help you then.
Why didn't you ever marry her after your wife died?
She was already married. Her and her husband was young and miserable with one another, like so many young married folks are. I thought they'd change with some age, but didn't turn out that way.
Being married also miserable?
No, not really. About 80% of the time, I guess. We ought to go to a real fishing tank. I didn't think about things like that too much. If she was here, I'd probably be just as crazy now as I was then in about 5 minutes. Is that ridiculous? No, it ain't really. Being crazy about a woman like her is always the right thing to do. Being a decrepit old bag of bones, that's what's ridiculous. Getting old.
Okay. Did you all see the sun? You know, it's not the kind of thing you can say, well, let's do that again, would you? So, what I haven't talked about yet, really, is movie stars, and a little bit about what they mean to movies. It's true that I've been very interested always have been very interested in the director's personality and how it comes across in the work. But there is no question but that what the audience is interested in is the actors on the screen. And they are the vehicle by which we really get everything across. They're what you see. And, you know, stars, the whole idea of movie stars has changed radically from when I was growing up, and it's changed from when I guess all of us started going to movies. Movie stars used to be something very unusual. You could what Alan Dwan in my book says, a young guy would come, young woman or a man would come off the street, and you wouldn't see too much. You put them up on the screen and they just blaze out at you. Just something about them, something unique. Orson Welles told me about watching Gary Cooper being shot for a picture, photograph, acting. And he said he was standing not more than 4 feet away from Cooper. And he thought they're going to have to reshoot it. There was nothing happening. And then when he saw the scene on the screen, he saw all this play of nuance, talk about nuance on the play of nuance on the face, which he said he swore standing not more than 4 feet away from Cooper, he did not see with his eyes, but the camera saw it. And this is the thing. I've found that there are absolutely stunning women that I've known, beautiful women, who when you photograph them still look great, but they don't quite look as great as when you're standing next to them. On the other hand, women who look great, but not as spectacular as when you photograph them. Sybil Shepherd's a good example. She's a very attractive woman, no question. But was what they used to say, Orson used to say, the camera likes her. And it was Akim Tamirov, an old character actor, who used to say, his definition of star quality was, the box looks at this one and says, I don't like him. The box looks at this one and says, I like him. And there is some kind of mysterious alchemy that happens between there and through the lens. I have a theory about it which is absolutely, totally unscientific, which is, the camera, it goes like this, the shutter goes like this, it's closed for as long as it's open. So my theory is that if the camera likes you, it's editing out the bad parts. And if it doesn't like you, it's leaving them in. But there are actors who, the minute I say the name, it conjures up something, whether it's Jimmy Stewart, or Gary Cooper, or Cary Grant, or John Wayne, or Marilyn Monroe, or Audrey Hepburn, or Katharine Hepburn. And you can go on like that. Each one of them gives you a particular image, and you get a sense of a certain kind of person, even though they played many different characters. Today, movie stars, there are movie stars, but they're mainly famous actors who are versatile, who want to be versatile. Clint Eastwood is one of the only ones around who you could say is one of the old-fashioned kind of stars, less of an actor than a personality, or Barbra Streisand. But most actors today are versatile, but they don't have that particular star quality that makes them unique. There were always stars who were star personalities who were not that good actors, not that versatile as actors. They could play a certain thing. And then there were star personalities who were also brilliant actors. For example, Wayne was really good at doing that thing he did. He wasn't as versatile as, say, Jimmy Stewart, who had a lot of different levels, who could play a Westerner and an Easterner with equal conviction, and yet retain that quality that we all identify, and it's often hard to define. Now I'm going to show you a last clip, and we may go a little bit more than 20 minutes with the questions if we don't get shot here, but I like to give you a little more time, but we'll see. There's a clip from a film called Anatomy of a Murder, directed by Otto Preminger. Now, I have to tell you, if you haven't seen it lately or if you've never seen it, it is really one of the great American films. It is very underrated, and it holds up brilliantly with a great cast. Anyway, Jimmy Stewart plays the lead in this, and it's a trial story about a rape and a murder made in 1958. And Otto Preminger directed. Now, Otto, I knew for a while, you know, he was supposed to be really tough on actors. You know, the famous story when he came up to Jean Seberg, who was just on her first picture, and, you know, came right up to her face like this and said, "Relax!" You know. That'll do it. But Otto was studied to be a lawyer. His father was the Attorney General in Austria, and a very famous lawyer. And Otto got bitten by the theater bug and decided to be an assistant to Max Reinhardt in Germany, and then became a director in Germany, and eventually came to America and so on. The interesting thing was that, of course, his youth, when he studied law, never left him. And that's why you could say that Anatomy of a Murder, which is a story about a lawyer, Jimmy Stewart, is Otto Preminger's most personal film. And when you watch it, you feel the investment that he has, emotional and intellectual and spiritual, on every level. And he understands the workings of a courtroom and judges and lawyers and everything in a way that I've never seen in a movie before. Now, I'm going to show you this little clip toward the end of the picture, where George C. Scott, it was his first movie, is the prosecutor, and he's interrogating Lee Remick, who's the wife of Ben Gazzara, who she was raped, and he, Gazzara, killed the rapist. And Jimmy is defending Gazzara. Watch how the use of the movie star in this scene increases your enjoyment of it. Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beaver. Is that correct, Miss Nance?
Yes.
Then, unless yours was a whirlwind courtship, you must have known Lieutenant Manning before your divorce, did you?
Yes.
Mrs. Manning, what is your religious affiliation?
I'm a Catholic.
Catholic in good standing?
Well, no, the divorce, you know.
You mean you were excommunicated because of the divorce and remarriage?
Yes.
Mrs. Manning, wouldn't you say that a Catholic who can blithely ignore one of the cardinal rules of her church could also easily ignore an oath taken on one of its artifacts, say, an oath taken on a rosary?
I don't think that's true.
But wouldn't you think there'd be some doubt about the integrity of such a person?
I don't know. All I know is the rosary means something to me.
I see. Well, I'll pass on to something else. Mrs. Manning, you testified that your husband came home late from his work on the night of the shooting. Were you a little angry about being late?
Well, I guess I was a little put out.
You had an argument?
Not much. A little.
When you left the trailer to go to the inn, did your husband know you were going?
He was asleep.
Was part of your reason for going without his knowledge because you were vexed?
Well, I'd been ironing all day, and yes, I guess that's true.
Your Honor, the counsel has deliberately cut off my view of the witness.
I'm sorry, Mr. Beaver. I don't want to interfere with your signals, Mr. Manning.
Well, I object to the implication I was signaling the witness. This is the shabbiest courtroom trick I've ever seen.
You haven't lived, Mr. Beaver.
Well, Your Honor, I ask the court to rule on my objection.
Mr. Dancer, will you be careful not to place yourself between Mr. Beagler and his witness?
Oh, of course, Your Honor. Anything else, Mr. Beaver?
You do it once more, I'll punch you all the way out into the middle of Lake Superior.
All right, thank you.
This robbing.
All right. Now you see the way that Preminger staged that. If it hadn't have been a movie star in the background, you maybe wouldn't have cared if he was blocked. But you were watching to see what Jimmy was going to do, and he blocked your view. So it was a way of using a movie star, a way of using the movie star to advantage, because obviously the audience wants to see what he's doing. So, Preminger was quite a guy, very, very cool, and a brilliant director. Jimmy Stewart was, well, you know, it's hard to describe what an icon is like, but he was very much like what you would think he was like. One of the main things, I think, was that he was incredibly funny, and when he told a story. He, I guess you've noticed I like movies. I like the good thing that they can contribute, and I think that they have a very positive power. I think that power has been used negatively of late, and I deplore that, and I hope that we can get back to a better place with movies. I guess it's one of the reasons I go around like this, and one of the reasons I wrote the book, is to keep the spirit alive of what movies once were, and with the hope that we can go back to the better parts of those times. You know, people ask you, what are movies, you know, what is it all about? And I have to say that with all my regard for directors, the best definition of movies I ever heard was from Jimmy Stewart. I'm going to tell you that story, and then we'll open this up for some questions. But he said, you know, we were talking about something and about movies, and he said, well, he says, you know, I was in Colorado shooting this Western, and we broke for lunch, and it was this usual terrible box lunch, and this old timer came over, and he looked at me and he said, are you Stewart? Well, I said, yeah. He said, you said a poem once in a picture. That was good. Well, I said, well, thank you. And he walked away. Now, I knew exactly what he was talking about, but the picture was made maybe 20 years before, and it was just a little scene in a bar where I said a poem, and wasn't more than a minute, and he'd remembered it all those years. And I thought, now that's the wonderful thing about pictures. If you're good, and God helps you, and you're lucky enough to have a personality that comes across, then what you're doing is you're giving people little tiny pieces of time that they never forget. I've never heard a better description of movies. Thank you.